I raised my glass of champagne, savoring the moment as the cabin lights dimmed and the plane reached cruising altitude. 16 years of climbing the corporate ladder had earned me this moment, keynote speaker at FutureLogix Global, the most prestigious conference in our industry. Then my phone vibrated. One new email. Subject line, employment termination, immediate effect. My name is Amanda Blake, and at 38 years old, I was about to learn that even at 35,000 feet, corporate betrayal can find you. The champagne suddenly tasted like vinegar. I read the email twice, my mind refusing to process the words on the screen. After 16 years at NovaForge Technologies, where I'd risen to become Director of Strategy for our AI supply chain solutions, I was being terminated effective immediately while flying to Amsterdam to represent the company. The sender, Darren Huxley, VP of Human Resources, a man known for his ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty to our CEO. The timing wasn't accidental, 1 hour and 5 minutes after takeoff, when I was physically unable to storm into anyone's office or make phone calls to allies within the company. The perfect execution of a corporate assassination. I scrolled down, searching for some acknowledgement of my contributions. The countless weekends sacrificed, the innovative strategies that had transformed our market position, the mentorship I'd provided to dozens of employees. But there was nothing. Just cold corporate language about strategic restructuring following the merger. My hands trembled as I set down my phone. The merger. Of course. That's when Elijah Redden had slithered into our executive team as the new chief marketing officer. I'd noticed how he'd subtly undermined me in meetings, publicly questioned my strategies while privately adopting them, and had been grooming a younger, rising star to take my position. Fury and shock coursed through me in equal measure. My first instinct was to order another drink and cry in the airplane bathroom. My second was to email my resignation letter with a list of grievances. But as the initial shock subsided, a clearer thought emerged. I wasn't going to slink away quietly. They'd made a crucial mistake. My name was still everywhere, on the conference app, digital boards, and the main stage schedule for 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. I still had my conference badge, my presentation materials, and 16 years of insider knowledge about NovaForge's operations. I ordered a double scotch and opened my laptop. If they wanted to dismiss me, fine. But I would be the one to write the final chapter of my NovaForge story. The plane landed in Amsterdam just after 8 p.m. Rather than cancel my reservation, I checked into the conference hotel using my personal credit card and changed into the black power dress I'd packed for the post-keynote networking event. I styled my shoulder-length brown hair into a sleek bob, applied fresh makeup, and practiced my most professionally intimidating smile in the mirror. By 9 p.m., I was gliding through the welcome reception, nodding to industry colleagues and accepting compliments on NovaForge's recent successes I had architected. Few people knew about my termination, which created a surreal bubble around me. I was simultaneously a NovaForge executive and unemployed. I lingered near groups of my soon-to-be former colleagues, catching fragments of conversations. "Did you hear they replaced her with an intern, basically?" whispered Melissa from product development to Jason from sales. "Elijah's planning to present her case study tomorrow, but with someone else's name on it," Jason replied, shaking his head. I smiled to myself. They had no idea I was still here. And they certainly had no idea that I still possessed the original USB drive containing all the development data for the Apollo Grid project, the revolutionary AI supply chain optimization system that had secured NovaForge 5 major contracts worth over $210 million combined. I made my way to the bar, ordered a sparkling water with lime, and surveyed the room. That's when I spotted her, Valeria Knox, CEO of Luminary Sync, NovaForge's direct competitor. Tall, commanding, with silver-streaked dark hair and a reputation for ruthless business acumen matched only by her ethical leadership. Our companies had been locked in competition for years, but I'd always respected her approach to business. She caught my eye across the room and raised an eyebrow in recognition. A minute later, she was beside me at the bar. "Amanda Blake," she said, her voice carrying a hint of her Argentine heritage. I've been looking forward to your keynote tomorrow. Your Apollo Grid implementation case study has been the talk of the industry. I took a sip of my water. I'm afraid you might be disappointed. There's been a change of plans. Oh. Her dark eyes studied me carefully. Corporate restructuring, perhaps? I heard rumors about NovaForge's post-merger adjustments. I laughed without humor. Is that what they're calling it? I prefer to think of it as terminating your keynote speaker while she's on a transatlantic flight to represent your company. Valeria's expression didn't change, but something flashed in her eyes. Recognition. Perhaps. Or opportunity. When did this happen? About 7 hours ago, mid-flight. She nodded slowly, then signaled the bartender. 2 gin and tonics, please. When our drinks arrived, she raised hers in a toast. To corporate idiots who don't recognize talent. I clinked my glass against hers. I'd drink to that, but I'm still processing the shock. May I speak frankly, Amanda? Valeria leaned closer. I've watched your career for years. Your strategies for NovaForge have been brilliant, even as a competitor. What they've done to you is not just cruel, it's foolish. Thank you. I felt a small warmth of vindication. I have a proposition. She handed me a business card with her personal number written on the back. If you walk onto that stage tomorrow wearing my colors instead of NovaForge's, I promise you NovaForge won't know what hit them. I stared at the card. You want me to announce I'm joining Luminary Sync, just like that? Not just joining, I'm offering you an executive advisory position, starting immediately. Her lips curved into a smile. Think about it. You know NovaForge's weaknesses better than anyone, and you deserve a soft landing after being pushed out of a plane. I turned the card over in my fingers, considering the implications. It was tempting, more than tempting. But was it the right move? I don't need an answer right now. Valeria continued. But remember, you're scheduled for that stage at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Whatever you decide, I suspect it will be the most memorable keynote in FutureLogic's history. After Valeria left, I remained at the bar, contemplating my options. The rational part of me knew I should just go home, lick my wounds, and start a careful job search. The wounded part wanted revenge, to expose NovaForge's backstabbing culture and the hollow marketing that Elijah had been pushing over substantive strategy. But the strategist in me recognized the third option, turning this betrayal into opportunity. I returned to my hotel room just before midnight, my mind racing. I pulled out my laptop and the USB drive containing the Apollo Grid data. I had nothing to lose now, and everything to reclaim. For the next 6 hours, I completely rebuilt my keynote presentation. I removed all NovaForge branding, but kept all the data, the metrics, the timelines, the implementation strategies, the results. I framed it as a comparative case study between two approaches: data-driven strategy versus empty marketing hype. I never mentioned NovaForge by name, but anyone who had worked with the company would recognize the thinly veiled references. Each slide was meticulously crafted to tell a story, not just about a successful project, but about a corporate culture that valued style over substance, quick wins over sustainable growth, and loyalty to individuals over commitment to excellence. By 6 a.m., I'd finished the presentation and emailed it to Valeria with a simple message. I accept your offer. See you at 9:30. After a quick shower and change into the outfit I'd planned to wear for my keynote, but with a sapphire blue scarf in Luminary Sync's signature color, I made my way to the conference center. My heart pounded as I approached the speaker preparation room, half expecting to be stopped by security. But my badge still worked, and the staff greeted me warmly. Ms. Blake, we're so excited about your keynote. The main hall is already filling up. I smiled. Thank you. I've made some last-minute changes to my presentation. Could you please load this version? The tech nodded, taking my USB drive. No problem. Any special requirements for your introduction? I hesitated for just a moment. Actually, yes. There's been a change. Please introduce me as the new executive advisor to Luminary Sync. The tech's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded professionally. Of course, I'll update the introduction. At 9:25, I stood in the wings of the main stage, watching as the hall filled to capacity. Over 3,500 industry professionals, including dozens of NovaForge employees, had come to hear me speak. I spotted Valeria in the front row, a knowing smile on her face. There was no sign of Elijah yet, probably running late as usual, ensuring his entrance would be noticed. At exactly 9:30, the MC stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs little introduction. With 16 years of experience in AI-driven supply chain solutions and the architect behind some of the industry's most innovative implementations, please welcome Amanda Blake, the new executive advisor to Luminary Sync. A dead silence fell over the room. I could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the NovaForge contingent. Then, as I walked confidently onto the stage, the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing in volume as the confusion gave way to curiosity. I stood at the center of the stage, surveying the sea of faces. In the third row, I spotted Darren Huxley, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Beside him sat our CEO, Marcus Elliott, whose expression flickered between confusion and anger. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I want to begin by talking about two teams. Same budget, same objectives. One succeeded through data, one failed through arrogance." The first slide appeared behind me, a stark comparison of two implementation approaches, with real metrics and timelines. I never mentioned NovaForge, but the data spoke for itself. When we approach AI implementation in supply chains, we have two paths. I continued. We can follow the data, listen to the experts on the ground, and build solutions that address real-world problems. Or we can chase buzzwords, prioritize marketing over functionality, and ultimately deliver systems that look impressive in slideshows but fall apart in practice. Slide after slide, I dissected the Apollo Grid project, highlighting the methodological approach that had made it successful, my approach, versus the flashy, substance-free marketing that had begun to infiltrate the company after the merger. About 15 minutes into my presentation, I noticed Elijah slip into the back of the hall. His face drained of color as he realized what was happening. A keynote had transformed into an indictment. "The results speak for themselves," I said, displaying the final metrics. "When we let data drive strategy, we see a 47% improvement in supply chain efficiency. When we let ego drive strategy, we see projects that burn through millions of dollars only to be quietly shelved 6 months later." The final slide appeared, a simple question. Which approach would you trust with your company's future? The room erupted in applause. As I looked out at the audience, I saw a mix of reactions: shock, admiration, discomfort. And in the case of many NovaForge employees, a dawning recognition. During the Q&A session that followed, no one directly addressed the obvious subtext of my presentation. Instead, the questions focused on the technical aspects of the Apollo Grid implementation and my thoughts on the future of AI in supply chain management. I answered each one with precision and insight, demonstrating exactly what NovaForge had decided to throw away. As I left the stage, I noticed a stream of NovaForge employees quietly exiting the hall. Valeria met me in the wings, extending her hand. "Masterful," she said simply. "Welcome to Luminary Sync." By lunchtime, my phone was exploding with notifications. My presentation had become the talk of the conference, with attendees dissecting its implications on social media. Just witnessed Amanda Blake deliver what was basically a TED Talk combined with a Senate hearing. Most savage career move I've ever seen. Future logics. Rumors that NovaForge CEO was spotted having a panic attack in the men's room after Blake's keynote. Anyone confirm? Corporate drama. Colleagues from other companies approached me throughout the day, offering congratulations on my new position and, in hushed tones, sharing their own stories of corporate betrayal. 3 potential clients who had been in negotiations with NovaForge asked for my business card, interested in hearing more about Luminary Sync's offerings. By the end of the day, I learned through the industry grapevine that the fallout at Nova Forge was immediate and severe. 7 key personnel had submitted their resignations. The executive team had called an emergency meeting. An internal investigation had been launched into the Apollo Grid project management, specifically, who had been responsible for its success and who had been taking credit. When I returned to my hotel room that evening, I removed my conference badge and stepped onto the balcony, looking out over Amsterdam's picturesque canals. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, vindication, and finally, a sense of clarity. I hadn't just survived being pushed out of Nova Forge, I'd reclaimed my narrative on my own terms. They had expected me to disappear quietly into the corporate ether. Instead, I had turned their betrayal into the launchpad for the next phase of my career. I smiled to myself, not a smile of glee but of clarity. They thought I would fall silent at 35,000 feet, I whispered to the evening air. They were wrong. I was just gathering momentum. The next morning, I woke to an email from Marcus Elliott, Nova Forge's CEO, asking for a private meeting. I declined politely, copying Valeria on my response. My time at Nova Forge was over. My future at Luminary Sync was just beginning. As I packed my suitcase, preparing to return to New York before flying to Luminary Sync's headquarters in San Francisco, I realized that being fired mid-flight had been the best thing that could have happened to me. It had forced me to confront the reality I'd been ignoring, that despite my contributions, Nova Forge had become a company I no longer recognized or respected. Sometimes, I reflected, you need to be pushed out of a plane to discover you've had wings all along. The transition to Luminary Sync wasn't seamless, but it was exhilarating. Valeria hadn't just offered me a position out of opportunism, she had been tracking my work for years and had a clear vision for how my expertise could help Luminary Sync outmaneuver Nova Forge in the increasingly competitive AI supply chain market. My first month as executive advisor was spent traveling between Luminary Sync's offices, meeting team leaders, and immersing myself in their current projects. I was impressed by what I found: a company culture that valued substance over showmanship, data over dogma, and collaboration over internal competition. 6 weeks after the Amsterdam incident, as it had come to be known in industry circles, I sat in Valeria's sleek San Francisco office, reviewing our strategy for approaching Nova Forge's increasingly nervous client base. The Harrington Group is wavering, I explained, sliding a tablet across her desk. Their contract with Nova Forge is up for renewal next quarter, and they're concerned about the exodus of talent. Valeria nodded, scanning the information. And you think our Phoenix framework would address their concerns? With some customization, yes, they need stability and proven results right now, not promises and buzzwords. Which is exactly what Elijah is offering them, Valeria said with a knowing smile. I'd learned that Elijah had somehow survived the initial fallout, though his position had been weakened. Darren Huxley, however, had been quietly asked to resign, becoming the scapegoat for the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding my termination. Speaking of Nova Forge, Valeria continued, have you seen the latest? She turned her monitor toward me, displaying a financial news article. Nova Forge stocks tumble amid project delays and client concerns. I skimmed the article, which detailed how Nova Forge had been forced to delay the launch of their next-generation AI platform, a platform I had been instrumental in developing. Without my guidance, the project had apparently run into significant technical challenges. I should feel vindicated, I said, leaning back in my chair. But mostly I feel sad for the talented people still there, watching their work get mismanaged. You've stayed in touch with some of them? I nodded. A few. Rachel Winters from the development team, Michael Chen from implementation. Good people caught in a bad situation. Valeria studied me for a moment. Would they consider coming to Luminary Sync? I've been careful not to poach, I replied. But if they reached out? We have openings, Valeria said simply. Talent recognizes talent. 3 months after Amsterdam, I led my first major client presentation for Luminary Sync. The client was Meridian Global. a multinational logistics corporation that had been considering both Luminary Sync and NovaForge for their AI supply chain overhaul. As I walked into the presentation room, I was surprised to see Elijah sitting at the table alongside Meridian's executives. He had apparently been brought in as a consultant after being pushed out of NovaForge, a development that gave me more satisfaction than I cared to admit. Our eyes met briefly, his widening in recognition. I gave him a professional nod and proceeded with my presentation, outlining Luminary Sync's approach to Meridian's specific challenges. Throughout the presentation, I could feel Elijah's gaze, a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. When question time came, he tried to poke holes in our technical specifications, but I countered each point with precise data and real-world examples. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone in the room which proposal had substance and which was built on marketing fluff. 2 weeks later, Meridian signed with Luminary Sync, a $40 million contract that made headlines in the industry press. The victory was sweet. But what made it meaningful wasn't beating Elijah. It was knowing that we would deliver a solution that would genuinely transform Meridian's operations. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about doing the work I'd always been passionate about, but in an environment that valued that passion. 6 months after Amsterdam, Luminary Sync hosted an industry roundtable on ethical AI implementation in supply chains. As the moderator, I had the opportunity to shape the conversation around principles I deeply believed in: transparency, accountability, and sustainable innovation. To my surprise, Marcus Elliott, NovaForge's CEO, was in attendance. During the networking session afterward, he approached me, a humbled expression on his face. "Amanda," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you thriving." I accepted his handshake, maintaining my professional composure. "Thank you, Marcus. How are things at NovaForge?" He sighed, the weight of the past months evident in his posture. "Challenging. We've made some changes since Amsterdam. I owe you an apology." What happened was inexcusable. "Yes, it was," I agreed, not making it easier for him. "We lost our way," he continued. "The merger, the pressure from investors. We forgot what made NovaForge successful in the first place. People like you." I took a sip of my water, considering my response carefully. "It's never too late to correct course. Marcus, NovaForge has good people. Listen to them." He nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "I've been meaning to ask. The Apollo grid documentation has some gaps. Things only you would know. Would you be willing to—" I held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Marcus, I'm committed to Luminary Sync now, but I wish you and the team well." As he walked away, I felt no animosity, just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. 1 year after Amsterdam, I stood on another stage, this time at Luminary Sync's annual client conference. As I prepared to unveil our revolutionary new platform, one that integrated many of the ideas I'd never been able to fully implement at NovaForge, I thought about how much had changed. I had a new team, one that challenged and supported me in equal measure. I had a leader in Valeria who recognized my value and gave me the autonomy to pursue innovation. And I had reclaimed not just my career, but my sense of purpose. As the audience applauded my presentation, I caught Valeria's eye in the front row. She gave me a subtle nod of approval, and I felt a surge of gratitude for that moment in Amsterdam when she had offered me not just a job, but a lifeline. Sometimes the worst moments of our professional lives become the catalysts for our greatest transformations. Being fired at 35,000 feet had forced me to spread my wings. And now, I was soaring higher than ever before. 2 years after the mid-air dismissal, I found myself back in Amsterdam for Future Logics Global. This time, I wasn't just a keynote speaker, I was the closing speaker. Selected to address the future of AI ethics in supply chain management based on Luminary Sync's groundbreaking work in the field. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through the same conference center where my professional life had been upended and then reborn. So much had changed since then. Luminary Sync had grown by 40%. largely due to our innovative approach to integrating ethical AI practices with practical business solutions. An approach I had spearheaded. As I prepared in the speaker's room, a familiar face appeared at the door. Rachel Winters, my former colleague from NovaForge, now Luminary Sync's Director of Development, one of several talented professionals who had followed me in the exodus from our former employer. "Nervous?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee. I smiled. Not nervous. Reflective. Last time I was here, I thought my career was over. Rachel laughed. "Instead, you burned down the house and built a better one from the ashes." "We built it," I corrected her. "This has never been a solo journey." As we walked toward the main hall, Rachel updated me on the latest industry gossip. NovaForge had been acquired 6 months ago by a larger tech conglomerate. Their value significantly diminished after losing key clients and talent. Elijah had bounced between consulting gigs before landing at a startup that was already showing signs of trouble. Darren Huxley had left the tech industry altogether. I took no pleasure in their struggles, well, perhaps a tiny bit in Elijah's case, but I had long since moved beyond the need for vindication. My focus was firmly on the future, not the past. The main hall was packed when I took the stage, even more crowded than it had been 2 years ago. I recognized faces from across the industry, including several former NovaForge employees who now worked for various competitors. In the front row sat Valeria, now not just my boss, but my mentor and friend. 2 years ago, I stood on this very stage and talked about the difference between data-driven strategy and empty marketing. I began. Today, I want to talk about something even more fundamental, the ethical framework that must underpin every decision we make in AI implementation. For the next 45 minutes, I outlined Luminary Sync's approach to ethical AI, from transparent algorithms to sustainable supply chain practices. I shared case studies demonstrating how ethical considerations had actually improved business outcomes for our clients. And I challenged the industry to move beyond mere compliance to genuine commitment to ethical innovation. The response was overwhelming, not just applause, but a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. As I looked out at the audience, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. After the presentation, during the executive reception, I was approached by countless industry leaders wanting to discuss collaboration opportunities. Luminary Sync was now recognized as not just a market leader, but a thought leader, setting the standards that others aspired to match. Later that evening, Valeria and I sat at the hotel bar, celebrating the successful conclusion of the conference. "I have something for you," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a formal offer letter, promoting me to Chief Strategy Officer of Luminary Sync, with an equity stake in the company. "You've more than earned this," Valeria said, raising her glass. "What you've built in 2 years is remarkable." "What we've built," I corrected her, echoing my words to Rachel earlier. "Of course," she acknowledged. "But it was your vision that guided us, your ability to turn adversity into advantage." I thought about that moment on the plane 2 years ago, reading the termination email with shaking hands, the shock, the anger, the fear, and then the determination that had risen from those emotions. "You know," I said, "I've never properly thanked Darren Huxley and Elijah for firing me at 35,000 feet." Valeria laughed. "Perhaps we should send them a fruit basket." "Or stock tips," I suggested, and we both laughed. As we continued our celebration, I reflected on the lesson I had learned from that mid-air dismissal. Sometimes being pushed out of your comfort zone, even cruelly, even unfairly, forces you to discover strengths you never knew you had. NovaForge had thought they were ending my career. Instead, they had launched me into a new orbit, one where I could finally shine at my brightest. And that was perhaps the sweetest revenge of all, not the satisfaction of watching them struggle without me, but the joy of thriving beyond anything I could have achieved had I stayed. As we left the bar, Valeria paused. "By the way, the board has approved your proposal for the Horizon Initiative. You'll have full autonomy and the budget you requested." The Horizon Initiative was my most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive program to develop next-generation AI supply chain solutions focused on sustainability and ethical resource management. It was the kind of visionary project that would have been dismissed as impractical at Nova Forge, but was embraced as innovative at Luminary Sync. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved. "This could change everything." "That's what you do best, Amanda," Valeria replied. "Change everything." Back in my hotel room, I stepped onto the balcony, looking out at the same Amsterdam skyline I had contemplated 2 years ago. But this time, there was no uncertainty, no raw wound of betrayal. There was only a sense of purpose and the quiet confidence that comes from having faced professional devastation and emerged stronger. I thought about the journey ahead, the challenges of my new role, the responsibility of leading Luminary Sync's strategic direction, the excitement of the Horizon Initiative, and I felt ready for all of it. They had fired me at 35,000 feet, expecting me to plummet. Instead, I had learned to fly. 3 years after Amsterdam, Luminary Sync had become the undisputed leader in ethical AI supply chain solutions. Under my guidance as CSO, we had launched the Horizon Initiative to critical acclaim and commercial success, attracting clients who were increasingly concerned about the ethical implications of their technology choices. I had built a team of brilliant strategists and technologists, many of whom I had personally recruited from companies that failed to recognize their talent. My leadership style, focused on empowerment, transparency, and results rather than politics, had created a department known throughout the industry for its innovation and integrity. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat in my San Francisco office, reviewing the quarterly results with my team. The numbers were impressive: a 28% increase in revenue, a 35% expansion in our client base, and a remarkable 92% client retention rate. The Horizon Initiative exceeded projections by 17%, noted Michael Chen, my director of implementation. Clients are specifically citing the ethical framework as a major factor in their decision to choose Luminary Sync. I nodded, feeling a sense of vindication. This proves what we've been saying all along. Ethical AI isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. After the meeting, Valeria called me into her office. She looked uncharacteristically serious. "Amanda, we need to talk about Nova Forge." My pulse quickened slightly. Even after 3 years, the name still triggered a visceral response. "What about them?" "Their new parent company has approached us about a potential acquisition of certain assets, specifically the remains of the Apollo grid technology." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. They want to buy back the technology they essentially forced out when they fired me." "Essentially," Valeria agreed. "They've recognized that our advancement of similar technologies has left them behind. They're looking to bridge that gap." "And you're considering it?" Valeria leaned back in her chair. "I'm considering letting you decide. You created Apollo Grid. You suffered for it. This should be your call." I took a moment to process this unexpected turn of events. 3 years ago, I would have relished the opportunity to deny Nova Forge access to the technology they had undervalued. But now, with the perspective of time and success, I saw the situation differently. "What would the terms be?" I asked. "Substantial," Valeria replied. 8 figures, plus ongoing royalties. And they want you to personally oversee a 3-month transition period. I laughed softly. So I'd be consulting for the company that fired me mid-flight. Poetic justice, isn't it? Valeria smiled. But only if you want it, we can easily decline. I considered the proposal carefully. Working with NovaForge again, even temporarily, would bring me face to face with my past. But it would also close a circle, allowing me to reclaim the last piece of my professional history on my own terms. Let's do it, I decided. But with one condition: I want to work exclusively with their technical teams. No executives, no HR. Valeria nodded. I'll make it happen. 6 weeks later, I walked into NovaForge's headquarters for the first time in 3 years. The security guard did a double take when he saw my visitor badge, clearly recognizing me from the company's tumultuous recent history. The building had changed. New branding reflected the acquisition, and the layout had been modernized. But as I was escorted to the conference room where the technical team awaited, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, most of whom nodded respectfully or offered small smiles of recognition. The technical team, mostly new hires who had joined after my departure, greeted me with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. They had heard the stories, of course. In some corners of NovaForge, I had become something of a legend, the executive who had exposed the company's flaws on an international stage and then built a more successful competitor. For the next 3 months, I worked closely with this team, transferring knowledge about the Apollo grid technology and helping them integrate it with their current systems. I was impressed by their talent and dedication, and I found myself genuinely invested in their success. During my final week at NovaForge, I received an unexpected meeting request from Marcus Elliott, who had somehow survived the acquisition and remained as a senior advisor. I hesitated but ultimately accepted. We met in his new, smaller office, the trappings of his former CEO status notably absent. "Amanda," he greeted me, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I shook his hand firmly. "Marcus, how have you been?" He gestured for me to sit. "Humbled, wiser, I hope. The past 3 years have been educational." I nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I wanted to apologize properly," he said. "Not just for what happened to you, but for the culture that allowed it to happen. I failed as a leader." "Yes, you did." I agreed, but without malice. "You prioritized the wrong things and the wrong people." He accepted this assessment with a nod. "The aftermath of your departure forced me to reevaluate everything: the company's direction, my leadership style, who I trusted, and why." "And what did you learn?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That building a company on substance is harder but more sustainable than building one on hype. That talent like yours comes along rarely and should be protected, not discarded. That actions have consequences far beyond what we can anticipate." I studied him, looking for signs of insincerity but finding none. "Those are valuable lessons, Marcus." "Expensive ones," he said with a rueful smile. "But necessary. Watching what you've built at Luminary Sync. It's impressive. It's what NovaForge could have been. It's what NovaForge was becoming before the merger." I pointed out, before Elijah and his approach took precedence over substance. Marcus nodded. "A costly mistake. One of many." He paused. "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to meet. I'm retiring next month, moving to Vermont, of all places. Before I go, I wanted to make amends where I could." "Consider it done," I said, rising from my chair. "The past is the past. Marcus, we've all moved forward." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Amanda, for what it's worth, firing you was the biggest mistake of my career. And not just because of the business implications." I smiled slightly. "I know, but it was the best thing that ever happened to mine." My final day as a consultant to NovaForge coincided with the announcement of Luminary Sync's latest innovation, a predictive AI system for sustainable supply chain management that would revolutionize the industry once again. The timing was not accidental. Valeria had a flair for the dramatic that rivaled my own. As I gathered my things from the temporary office I'd been using, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me full circle. The technical team presented me with a small parting gift, a model airplane with a tiny parachute attached and a card that read, "Thanks for teaching us how to land safely after turbulence." I laughed genuinely, touched by the gesture and the relationships I'd built over the past 3 months. These talented engineers and developers deserved good leadership and a clear vision. Perhaps, with the right guidance and the Apollo grid technology, they might find their way back to relevance in the industry. On my way out, I passed the wall of executive portraits in the main lobby. My photo had long since been removed, of course, but I noticed with satisfaction that Elijah's was gone too. Small victories. I stepped outside into the bright California sunshine, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The past no longer had any hold on me. I had reclaimed every piece of it on my own terms. My driver was waiting to take me directly to the airport, where a private jet would fly me to Tokyo for the launch of Luminary Sync's Asia-Pacific expansion, a project I had conceptualized and would now lead as the newly appointed president of global strategy. As the car pulled away from NovaForge headquarters, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore, just ghosts of a professional life I had outgrown. My focus was entirely on the future, a future I had built from the ashes of betrayal. My phone buzzed with a message from Valeria. Tokyo team, eagerly awaiting your arrival. Wall Street Journal requesting exclusive interview about your journey from NovaForge to Luminary Sync leadership. I smiled to myself. Once, I had been terrified of the fall. Now, I embraced the freedom of flight. 4 years after being fired at 35,000 feet, I stood at the podium in Luminary Sync's headquarters, addressing our global team about our latest acquisition, a promising startup with breakthrough technology in predictive maintenance AI. This acquisition represents more than just new technology. I explained to the assembled employees and the thousands more watching via video conference. It represents our commitment to nurturing innovation rather than stifling it, to recognizing talent rather than threatening it, to building a company culture based on substance, integrity, and forward thinking. The words weren't just corporate rhetoric. They were the principles that had guided my leadership since taking over as president of global strategy. Under my direction, Luminary Sync had transformed from Valeria's promising challenger to the undisputed industry leader, with a market valuation 3 times that of our nearest competitor. After the presentation, I retreated to my office to prepare for an upcoming board meeting. Rachel knocked on my door, tablet in hand. The numbers for Q2, she said, handing me the device. We've exceeded projections across all divisions. I scanned the report, noting with satisfaction the particularly strong performance of our ethical AI initiatives. What had once been considered a niche concern was now a central business driver, with multinational corporations specifically seeking out Luminary Sync for our commitment to transparent and ethical technology deployment. Excellent work, I told Rachel. The team deserves to celebrate this. Speaking of celebration, Rachel hesitated, then continued. The planning committee for the company's 15th anniversary gala next month wanted to know if you'd be comfortable with them including a segment on the Amsterdam incident in the retrospective video. They see it as a pivotal moment in the company's history. I leaned back in my chair, considering the request. 4 years ago, the mention of Amsterdam would have triggered a visceral reaction: anger, vindication, perhaps even lingering hurt. Now, it felt like a story about someone else, a character in a business case study rather than a defining personal trauma. Sure, I decided. It is part of our history. Just make sure the focus is on what we built afterward, not just the dramatic exit. Rachel nodded, clearly relieved. Will do. Oh, and the talent acquisition team asked me to remind you about the meeting tomorrow with those 2 executives from Meridian Global who are interested in joining us. After Rachel left, I turned to the large windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. Poaching top talent from other companies had never been my preferred approach. I preferred to develop people from within. But I made exceptions for individuals who were clearly undervalued and constrained in their current roles, just as I had been at NovaForge. My assistant buzzed to remind me of my scheduled video call with Valeria, who was currently in Singapore overseeing our Asian expansion. Our relationship had evolved over the years from boss-employee to equal partners guiding Luminary Sync's global strategy. Her vision combined with my execution had created a virtually unstoppable force in the industry. Amanda. Valeria's face appeared on my screen, her trademark energy evident despite the late hour in Singapore. Have you seen the latest from NovaForge? I shook my head. I don't make a habit of following their news. Well, you might want to make an exception today. She forwarded me a press release. They've just announced a major restructuring. Their parent company is spinning them off as a separate entity focused exclusively on ethical AI supply chain solutions. I skimmed the release, one detail immediately catching my eye. They've named Diana Winters as the new CEO. Rachel's younger sister, Valeria noted. Wasn't she part of your team at NovaForge? She was an analyst on the Apollo Grid project. I confirmed. Brilliant woman. I tried to recruit her after Amsterdam, but she declined. Said someone needed to stay and fight for the company's soul. Well, it seems she won that fight. I nodded, genuinely pleased for Diana. Good for her. And honestly, good for Nova Forge. The industry needs more ethical players, not fewer. You're not concerned about the competition? Valeria asked, studying my reaction. I laughed. Valeria, we're 4 years and several innovations ahead of them. I wish them well. But they have a long way to go before they're a genuine threat to our market position. After finishing the call with Valeria, I found myself thinking about Diana Winters and her loyalty to Nova Forge. At the time, I had seen her decision to stay as naive, perhaps even foolish. Now, I recognized it as its own form of courage, the determination to reform from within rather than abandon ship. Different paths, different choices, but perhaps the same underlying commitment to creating change in an industry that desperately needed it. That evening, as I prepared for a rare dinner at home with my partner James, a university professor I had met 2 years after Amsterdam, who had never known me as anything but the confident, successful executive I had become, I received an unexpected email. The sender, Diana Winters, newly appointed CEO of Nova Forge. Subject, an overdue conversation. The message was brief but intriguing. Amanda, congratulations on your continued success at Luminary Sync. Your vision for ethical AI has transformed not just your company, but our entire industry. As I step into my new role at Nova Forge, I find myself wanting to have a conversation with you, not as competitors, but as 2 women committed to changing the way technology serves humanity. Would you be open to meeting? No agendas, no business proposals, just coffee and conversation. Regards, Diana. I read the email twice, considering the implications. 4 years ago, I would have dismissed such an overture as a competitive ploy or a waste of time. Now, secure in both my position and my purpose, I saw it differently, as an opportunity for genuine dialogue that might benefit the industry as a whole. I composed a simple reply. Diana, thank you for reaching out. I would welcome the conversation. Next Thursday, 10 a.m., Lighthouse Cafe in Sausalito. Their view of the bay is conducive to big-picture thinking. Best, Amanda. As I hit send, I reflected on how much had changed. The woman who had been unceremoniously fired at 35,000 feet would never have imagined sitting down for a friendly chat with the new CEO of Nova Forge. But that woman had evolved, growing beyond the need for vindication to embrace a larger vision of success, one that included lifting others rather than merely surpassing them. Over dinner, I shared the exchange with James, who knew the broad strokes of my professional history but had never been burdened with the emotional weight I had once carried. Do you think she's going to try to poach you back? He asked, only half joking. I laughed. The very idea absurd. No, I think she's smart enough to know that ship has sailed. I suspect she wants to talk about industry standards for ethical AI. There's been movement toward creating a consortium. And would Luminary Sync be open to that? Collaborating with competitors? I took a sip of wine, considering the question. 5 years ago, I would have said absolutely not. Protect our competitive advantage at all costs. But now, I think raising the ethical standards across the entire industry benefits everyone, including us. We'd still be the leaders, but in a market that values what we've always prioritized. James studied me with the perceptive gaze that had first attracted me to him. You've come a long way from revenge by PowerPoint. I smiled, acknowledging the truth in his observation. I've realized that true success isn't just about personal vindication. It's about creating lasting change. The following Thursday, I arrived at Lighthouse Cafe a few minutes early, selecting a table with a panoramic view of the bay. The morning fog was just beginning to lift, revealing glimpses of the Golden Gate Bridge, a fitting metaphor for the conversation I was about to have. Diana arrived precisely on time, looking both confident and slightly nervous. At 35, she was younger than I had been when I received that fateful email on the plane, but her eyes held a similar determination, the look of someone who had fought her way to the top and intended to use her position to drive meaningful change. Amanda, she greeted me warmly. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Diana, congratulations on your appointment. An impressive achievement. After exchanging pleasantries and ordering coffee, Diana got to the point. I want to start by acknowledging the elephant in the room, she said directly. What happened to you at NovaForge was inexcusable. As someone who was there, who saw the aftermath, I want to apologize for the company's actions. I waved away the apology. That's ancient history, Diana. Different leadership, different company culture. You don't need to carry that particular corporate sin. Perhaps not. But I think it's important to acknowledge it. Because in many ways, your departure and how you responded to it created the conditions that eventually allowed someone like me to become CEO. You exposed the rot at the core of the company. It took years, but that exposure ultimately led to healing. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this perspective I had never considered. An unexpected legacy. More than you know, Diana continued. Your keynote at Amsterdam became required viewing for our leadership development program. How Not to Treat Talent is the unofficial subtitle. I couldn't help but laugh. Now that is ironic. Life often is. Diana took a sip of her coffee. But I didn't ask to meet just to reminisce about corporate drama. I wanted to talk about the future, specifically, the ethical AI consortium that's been proposed by the International Technology Standards Board. I've been following the discussions. I acknowledged. Valeria has expressed interest in Luminary Sync participating. NovaForge as well, Diana said. And while we're currently competitors, I believe this is one area where collaboration serves everyone's interests, most importantly, the public's. For the next hour, we discussed the proposed consortium in detail, the standards it might establish, the enforcement mechanisms, the balance between innovation and regulation. Despite representing competing companies, we found substantial common ground in our vision for how AI should be developed and deployed ethically. As our meeting drew to a close, Diana hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind throughout our conversation. I have to ask, do you ever regret leaving NovaForge? Wonder what might have been if you'd stayed and fought from within, as I did. I considered the question carefully, respecting the sincerity with which it was asked. No, I answered honestly. Our paths were different because we're different people at different stages of our careers. You had the patience and persistence to work within a flawed system to change it gradually. I needed, and the industry needed, a clean break and a fresh approach. I smiled. Besides, being fired at 35,000 feet tends to limit one's career options within a company. Diana nodded, accepting my answer. Different paths to the same destination. Exactly. And now, perhaps our companies can walk parallel paths toward a more ethical future for AI. As we parted ways outside the cafe, I felt a sense of completion. A circle closing that I hadn't even realized was still open. NovaForge was part of my past, but in a way I never could have anticipated. It might also be part of my future. Not as an adversary to be defeated, but as an ally in creating the ethical framework our industry desperately needed. Back at Luminary Sync headquarters, I found Valeria waiting in my office, curiosity evident in her expression. How was coffee with the enemy? She asked, only half joking. Productive, I replied. And I don't think enemy is the right word anymore. Competitor, certainly. Perhaps eventually collaborator on industry standards. Valeria studied me for a moment. You've come a long way from the woman who set fire to NovaForge with a keynote presentation. We've all evolved, I acknowledged. But I don't regret that keynote for a second. Sometimes you need to burn things down before you can build something better. Speaking of building, Valeria said, transitioning to business. The board has approved your proposal for expanding the Horizon Initiative into healthcare AI. They were particularly impressed with your emphasis on ethical algorithms for patient data. I nodded, pleased, but not surprised. The board had come to trust my vision implicitly over the years. recognizing that my commitment to ethical AI wasn't just a moral stance, but a business advantage in an increasingly regulated industry. I'll start assembling the team next week, I said. I want to pull in some of our best minds from different divisions. Fresh perspectives lead to better solutions. As Valeria left, I turned to the large windows overlooking the city. In the distance, I could just make out the building that housed NovaForge's San Francisco offices, once the center of my professional universe, now just another structure in a city filled with technology companies. 5 years ago, I had been devastated by what I perceived as the end of my career. Now, I recognized it as merely the end of a chapter, a necessary conclusion that had allowed me to write a far more compelling story. Being fired at 35,000 feet had been the best thing that ever happened to me, not because it had led to revenge or vindication, though those had certainly been sweet in the moment, but because it had forced me to redefine success on my own terms, to build something that aligned with my values, rather than compromising them for corporate advancement. I opened my laptop to begin drafting the announcement for the Healthcare AI Initiative. As I typed the opening paragraph, outlining our commitment to transparent algorithms and patient privacy, I felt the familiar surge of purpose that had guided me since Amsterdam. They had thought I would fall silent at 35,000 feet. Instead, I had found my true voice and used it to change an industry. 5 years to the day after that fateful flight to Amsterdam, I sat in the green room at Tech Forward, the world's premier technology conference, preparing to deliver the opening keynote address. The topic: Ethical AI, the business case for doing the right thing. The journey from mid-air dismissal to this stage, addressing 5,000 industry leaders and setting the tone for the most influential tech gathering of the year, would have seemed impossible on that plane 5 years ago. Yet here I was, not just surviving, but thriving beyond anything I could have imagined. A production assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Blake, 5 minutes until you're on." I nodded, taking a final moment to gather my thoughts. This speech wasn't just about Luminary Sync's success or my personal journey. It was about the transformation of an entire industry. A transformation I had helped to lead, but that extended far beyond any single company or individual. As I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, I caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Valeria in the front row, beaming with pride. James a few seats away, offering a subtle thumbs up. Diana Winters with her NovaForge executive team, here not as adversaries but as participants in the industry-wide ethical AI consortium that had launched 3 months earlier. And in the back, partially obscured but unmistakable, Marcus Elliott, retired but apparently still following industry developments. I adjusted the microphone and surveyed the audience, taking in the moment. 5 years ago, I began. I received an email that I thought would end my career. I was 35,000 feet in the air, en route to a conference where I was scheduled to represent my company as a keynote speaker. The email informed me that I was being terminated, effective immediately. A murmur ran through the audience. Many knew the story, but few had heard me tell it directly. What happened next has become something of a legend in our industry. I continued with a smile. But the real story isn't about a dramatic exit or a well-executed revenge. It's about what happens when we're forced to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about success, about leadership, and about the responsibility we have to use technology ethically. For the next 45 minutes, I shared not just my personal journey, but the evolution of the industry's approach to ethical AI, from an afterthought to a central consideration in every aspect of development and deployment. I outlined the business case for ethical practices, presenting data from Luminary Sync and other consortium members that demonstrated conclusively how ethical approaches led to better products, more loyal customers, and ultimately, stronger financial performance. The choice between doing what's right and doing what's profitable is a false dichotomy. I concluded, in the long run, the companies that will thrive are those that recognize their responsibility not just to shareholders, but to society as a whole. Ethical AI isn't just a moral imperative, it's smart business. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. As I made my way off stage, a young woman approached me, barely out of college based on her appearance, with the eager expression of someone just beginning their career. "Ms. Blake," she said, extending her hand. "Your story, what you did at Amsterdam and everything since, it's the reason I went into tech. You showed that standing up for what's right can change an industry." I shook her hand, oddly moved by this unexpected testament to impact I hadn't fully recognized. "What's your name?" "Sophia Liu. I just started at the AI Ethics Division at Nova Forge." I smiled at the symmetry. "Diana Winters is an excellent mentor. You're in good hands." "I know," Sophia replied. "She tells us every day that ethical AI isn't just a department, it's the foundation of everything we do." She hesitated, then added, "That's your legacy, not just at Luminary Sync, but across the industry." As Sophia walked away, I found myself reflecting on her words. Legacy. It wasn't something I had consciously considered during the frantic days after Amsterdam, or even during the successful years that followed. I had been focused on survival, then rebuilding, then growth and innovation. But she was right. Beyond the personal success and vindication, beyond Luminary Sync's market dominance, there was this larger impact, a fundamental shift in how our industry approached its responsibilities. A shift that had begun, in some small way, with an email received at 35,000 feet and the choices I had made in its aftermath. Later that evening, at the conference reception, I found myself unexpectedly face-to-face with Marcus Elliott. He had aged considerably since our last meeting, but his eyes were clear and direct as they met mine. "Remarkable speech, Amanda," he said, extending his hand. "Truly insightful." I accepted his handshake. "Thank you, Marcus. I'm surprised to see you here." "I keep my hand in," he said with a slight smile. "And I wanted to see how the story ended." "The story?" "Yours, Nova Forge's, the industry's. When I made the catastrophic error of allowing you to be terminated, of not recognizing what you brought to the company, I set in motion events that transformed not just your career, but the entire sector." He shook his head ruefully. "An expensive lesson in the value of ethical leadership." I studied him, recognizing the genuine reflection in his words. "We all learned valuable lessons, Marcus, some more painfully than others." "Indeed." He hesitated, then continued. "I've often wondered, if you could go back to that moment on the plane, knowing everything that would follow, would you change anything? Would you fight to stay at Nova Forge?" The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't considered it before, but because the answer had evolved over time. 5 years ago, I would have said no. That being fired was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. I replied thoughtfully. 3 years ago, I might have said I would change how I responded, perhaps been less publicly vindictive at Amsterdam. I smiled slightly. But now, no, I wouldn't change a thing. Not the firing, not my response, not the path that followed. Because all of it, the pain, the anger, the rebuilding, led not just to personal success, but to something larger. Something that might not have happened any other way. Marcus nodded, accepting this answer. "For what it's worth, I agree. Though as the villain in the story, I perhaps should wish for a different ending." "Not the villain, Marcus." I corrected him. "Just another flawed human making decisions in a system that often prioritizes the wrong things." The real villain was the culture, one that we've all been working to change ever since. As Marcus moved on to greet other attendees, I found Valeria at my elbow, an amused expression on her face. "Making peace with ancient history?" she asked. "Something like that," I replied, recognizing that even our worst moments can lead to our greatest contributions. Valeria nodded, understanding immediately. "Speaking of contributions, the board meeting tomorrow is going to be interesting. There's talk of creating a new position, Chief Ethics Officer, with global responsibility across all divisions." "Let me guess," I said, reading between the lines. "They want me to take it." "They're planning to ask," Valeria confirmed. "It would mean stepping back from some of your operational responsibilities. but it would give you a platform to influence the entire organization and beyond through the consortium. I considered the proposition, feeling a sense of rightness about it. I'll hear them out. Later that night, as James and I walked along the waterfront near our hotel, I shared the conversation with him. Chief Ethics Officer, he mused. Sounds like a perfect fit for where you are now in your career. It does, doesn't it? I agreed. Less about quarterly targets, more about long-term impact. From fired executive to industry thought leader, James observed, not a bad 5-year plan. I laughed, squeezing his hand. Not exactly how I would have planned it, but sometimes the universe has better ideas than we do. We stopped to watch the lights of the city reflected in the dark water. A moment of stillness amid the whirlwind of the conference. You know what I realized today? I said quietly. That getting fired at 35,000 feet wasn't just a professional setback that I overcame. It was the catalyst for the work I was meant to do all along. James nodded, understanding as he always did. Some people spend their entire careers trying to find that kind of clarity. I'm not sure I would recommend my particular path to clarity, I said dryly, but I am grateful for where it led. The next morning, before the board meeting where I would be offered the Chief Ethics Officer position, a role I had already decided to accept, I took a moment in my hotel room to reflect on the journey of the past 5 years. I thought about the woman on that plane, reading an email that shattered her professional identity. The woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of betrayal, transforming personal pain into industry-wide change. The woman who had discovered that true success wasn't measured in titles or revenge, but in lasting impact. They had fired me at 35,000 feet, expecting me to disappear quietly into the corporate ether. Instead, I had used the fall to learn how to soar, higher and further than I ever could have if I'd remained safely tethered to the ground. And in doing so, I hadn't just rewritten my own story. I had helped to change the narrative of an entire industry. Sometimes, I reflected as I prepared to step into the next chapter of my career. The worst moments of our professional lives become the catalysts for our greatest contributions. Being dismissed mid-air had forced me to spread my wings. And now, 5 years later, I wasn't just flying, I was showing others how to soar.